Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. So we're finally here. We're finally here at the Titanic episode. I've been wanting to do this forever. When I first heard this story, it blew my mind. And what's really cool about it is the evidence just got conclusive. And what's going to be funny is anybody who tries to deny this, I'm going to show a photograph at the very, very end that will just fix it all for everybody. Many of us, I think every human being on planet Earth, regardless of your age, you've been taught this romantic story about the largest ship ever built, called the Titanic, and how on its maiden voyage, leaving from, Southampton, England, headed for the United States. It runs into an iceberg, tears this big strip down the side of the hull, and then it took on water. And of course, the romantic story is that the captain thought, man, it's the Titanic. No way could this possibly ever sink. And eventually, of course, it sinks. A bunch of people died. A bunch of people survive. Rich people survive. Poor immigrants died down below. And then what's interesting for young people who don't remember, well, not don't remember, but you didn't experience this, everyone over 50. I don't remember when they found it, but I would say probably everyone over 40. We didn't know where the thing was. It was at the bottom of the ocean. Nobody knew where. And then eventually someone found it. James Cameron went down and looked at it and all this other stuff. And that was pretty much the end of it. You know, a few Titanic specials on TV. And the evidence I'm going to report in this episode should, if you've never heard this theory, you're going to have the best time of your life. If you've heard this theory, I'm going to update you with, I think, just conclusive stuff I found in some videos, some other reading. It has not been debunked. I'm going to talk about a debunking special I saw on TV, which was the biggest bunch of BS I've ever seen in my life. And we'll show you how they did that. I don't know if I could find the frames from that thing. I probably can't. And I do want to put a footnote in real quick. Some people say, why don't you put more photos in your videos? And there's a very strategic reason why. Sometimes it's sheer busyness on my part, but most of the time it's because I think that just the way that the music industry was allowing sampling to occur as soon as they figured out how to do it, and then eventually everyone had to pay for their samples, you're going to have censorship that's going to kill a bunch of videos out there because they use a frame from someone else's content, and I've done it, right? And there might be videos that are removed. But imagine, a frame of a movie is forbidden to be used. So I try to keep it down to some pretty easy images these days. But okay, where does this all begin? Well, there's a company called White Star, owned by a little guy you might know called JP Morgan. And they set out to create 2 ships that were utterly identical, except for a few things. And we'll get into those differences just a little bit down the line here, because it won't make much sense to you right at the beginning. But one was called the Olympic, and it was finished first. Looked exactly like the Titanic, minus a couple little things. And then there was another ship, second, called the Titanic, from the White Star passenger company. Now, the Olympic, because it set sail first, it immediately had a collision with a tugboat, destroyed the tugboat, and slightly hurt the ship. And then it runs into what kind of looks like a battleship from back in the day called the Hawk. And it severely injures the Hawk. And then when they looked at the, cause and all that kind of stuff, of course, White Star is saying it's the Hawk's fault. But the people who serve the insurance companies said, no, it was the Olympics' fault. You've already bumped into a tugboat. You're a moron. We're going to get into the captain as well. And then they kind of patch it up a little bit, and then they take it on another trip, and they run into a shipwreck down below, and they hurt the ship again. So 3 huge wrecks on this Olympic. Finally, when they finally said, hey, what do we got to do to fix this ship to make it seaworthy again? And they said, you're going to have to open the ship up and replace its frame. Little problem there. But the theory is that, and we're going to get into all the facts here, we're going to go through, is that because the Olympic was so screwed up and they were out of money, each ship cost $10 million to make. And they had money, but come on, it's an adventure. You're going to have to, all businessmen have limits, right? So the theory is that they swapped the boats. And you might be like, what? Well, they look almost identical. There are 2 things about the boats that are physically different. Although in photographs, man, I can't find the second one. But we're going to bumper on the very end here with, at the very end, this other debunking video I saw, which was utterly laughable. And the fact that the guy accepted what he saw was ridiculous. The guy had researched this for over 30 years, and he was brought into some museum or something, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But if you were to take the ship and pretty much divide it down the middle, the front half of the ship had 2 things different. And again, photographs, I can't tell the second thing I'm going to say. But the one you can definitely tell is that the windows on the side of the ship for the Titanic were twice as wide. They're very thin windows, but they're twice as wide on the Titanic, and meaning that when you open them, the hole that you look at was twice as big. Now, we're talking probably, I don't know, the pictures are from really far away, but let's just say the Olympics windows opened to 12 inches. That would mean that the Titanic's opened up 24 inches. Something like that. Very visible in the photographs. Now, the other one that was reported later was that, how ships have the hull, and then they have a deck, and then they have the part where the really fancy passenger compartments go, and then they have the captain's sort of, deck up above. They say that one of the ships had a curved front piece of steel, I guess offering a little more real estate, and one of them had a flat design, so a little less real estate at that level. Can't see it in the photographs that I've seen, but then again, the Olympic has very few photographs is the problem. But there are photographs of both of these boats in a port together. This conspiracy is going to start with a very basic concept of insurance fraud, and then it's going to end with the facilitation of the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States of America. And we're going to get to all that. So as I said, right after the Olympic is deployed for its first maiden voyage, within a week it hits this tugboat. Just creaming the tugboat. September 20th, 1911, the Olympic has another accident with the HMS Hawk. Again, they argued about whose fault it was. But of course, you're always going to say it's not you because you're going to have to pay a ton of money. But whoever was presiding over the accident claim on behalf of the people, I guess, said, no, it was the Olympics' fault. The Hawk was really bad off. I mean, the front of it was just caved in really bad. And it was a British inquiry, just so that you know, the Hamptons over there. So immediately, because of the British inquiry, with the collision with the Hawk, White Star was found liable and had to pay money to the Hawk. And I can't find a number for those damages, but then they're losing more money, right? Haven't finished the Titanic yet, and they're out a bunch of cash having to fix the Olympic and pay for damages, right? February 28th, 1912, that's when it hit the shipwreck, which is kind of a bummer, right? I mean, you almost, I don't know how easy it is to know where shipwrecks are, and in various regions. It wasn't the internet days with GPS and all these trackers and stuff where you could just say, hey, this is where all the space junk is in space and don't hit anything. Okay. When it hit the shipwreck, it was a very fortuitous thing for this theory to become solidified. Now, usually a propeller on a ship takes about 5 hours to replace, as I'm told. But since this propeller is so utterly massive on the back of one of these ships, when they hit the shipwreck, it damaged the propeller. And a damaged propeller has got all kinds of issues. If it's not balanced perfectly, the ship will wobble. It won't be able to hit speeds. It's going to start shaking all of the innards of the ship and the ball bearings and everything. It doesn't work. So you have to replace it. Well, they don't want the Olympic to be out of commission for a long time as they build this new propeller. But to their benefit, they have a copy ship that is right there. So they take the propeller off of the Titanic and they put it on the Olympic. And there's a little number on the propeller, number 401. So that has been stuck on the Olympic. Remember that number. Start that. So at this point, we have all this damage. We've got a liable case to the HMS Hawk. They've had to replace a propeller, They've got, somebody claiming they're going to have to cut the ship in half and put a new frame inside. I mean, just think about that. That's huge, right? So they're up to their butt in bills, debt, and the only way to really feasibly recoup all this money is to run both ships full steam all day long with paying passengers, freight, cargo, whatever. But the Olympic is sort of just holding together by a thread. Now, you might ask yourself, how the hell could they possibly swap ships? How could you possibly do it? Well, at this point, very few people have sailed on the ship, so it's not like everybody has it in the back of their mind. But the ships are physically identical except for those two things. And half the people I've read through don't have any clue about the supposed bow-shaped front piece on the front of the captain's deck. Again, I examined the photographs again today to try and see it. And I'm telling you, both of them look flat to me. And I think that's part of a second conspiracy that we're going to get to in the end here. But what the White Star Company did was that the only places where the ship's name is indicated anywhere on the vehicle that's actually permanently attached to the vehicle. I mean, get this. This is a true story, true fact, is the nameplate on the front of the ship. It's a nameplate, and it's usually etched into the hull of the ship, but they had plaques that were bolted on. And this is a great thing. It's going to be a great thing in the future of our story here. So in the middle of the night, we think they swapped the plaques. Okay, what else has got the name of the ship on it? Well, believe it or not, the only two things outside of the plaque, totaling three things, is that the lifeboats and the life jackets have the name of the ship on it. Everything else inside both ships just said White Star on it, keeping it nice and generic, thus facilitating the swap. Now, it might be worth noting that here we have official facts. Okay, the official story facts. There are all these things about the Olympic, and you never even heard of the Olympic, right? You never heard of it. I never heard of it. The Titanic sank. There's a whole movie about it. James Cameron made it, right? Made a shit ton of money. They never mentioned the Olympic. I mean, I don't remember the movie. Maybe it was in the beginning. Not my kind of film, guys. Okay. Well, the Olympic, without any repairs at all, continued in service for 25 years until it was commissioned by the British government. How is it possible that you basically have a salvage ship? Any of you know about salvaged cars? You can go get a car at a junkyard where they've literally cut the back half of a car off that was hit from the rear, keep the front, cut the another car in half, the same exact year and model, get rid of the front half that's been impacted in the front, and they weld the two halves together. I had several friends have these cars, and they run fine. You just wouldn't want to be in a super high impact collision in them. So the Olympic had basically that version of a problem, where the frame needed to be replaced. But supposedly it runs for 25 years, full profit, no problem. So, before we get into the actual night of, it's important that you understand something. Now, many of you who understand the Federal Reserve story have heard about the Jekyll Island meeting. Was it Bill Still? He is literally a god when it comes to this information. He created the amazing 3.5-hour series called The Money Changers. Little Paul Harvey there, he got completely screwed by the guy that actually duplicated and published the discs. And he doesn't make any money from that, and almost never did back in the day because he got screwed. So he went off and created a Jekyll Island movie that if you haven't seen it, just look up Bill Still. I think it's probably billstill.com. Haven't seen him for a long time. He's a real journalist, but he taught us all about how the money changers do what they do. But there was a meeting, and some very powerful people got together. Their names are Paul Warburg, Senator Nelson Aldrich, Frank Vanderlip, Benjamin Strong, Henry Davidson, Charles Norton, and Abe Andrews. They all met to plan the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve was obviously what we have today. It just went .gov recently. We're hoping that means there's some giant changes coming with Treasury notes to replace their fake paper. What they were going to do, though, is obviously take us off the gold standard, print fantasy money, just like monopoly money. They were never going to create the interest money that we're going to owe every time we have them make us money. So it's a Ponzi scheme. We can never pay back the loan because there's never enough money created to pay off the loan that we have. They took all of our gold as collateral. It's all been removed from Fort Knox. And they invented the IRS, which has a whole gaggle of police officers that'll come steal your stuff. Although I have to say I've never personally known anyone that's ever had that happen. They knew our Constitution forbid taxes from ever being collected off the people unless it was an apportioned tax, which means everyone has the same rate, which we never have. So inside the tax code, it says it's voluntary, but their argument is, a traffic light's voluntary too, which is not. There's a law and a statute that says you got to stop at a red light. So that's where the Tea Party came up in the United States with 3,600 ex-IRS agents that said this is complete fraud. You don't have to pay taxes on your personal property. Then people like Wesley Snipes learned that, tried to do it, and they put him in jail. So they control the judges, so you can never bring any evidence in. Some people have won cases against them. But up until 1913, in the United States of America, corporations, firearms, and tobacco paid all the taxes for America. And we were just fine. What they did is in Jekyll Island, they planned to give themselves infinite tax breaks on the corporate level. Firearms and tobacco can still be taxed, and taxed more and more and more these days, but it all went on the back of the people. The people were sold a Robin Hood story of the exact opposite. And within a year, they had raised over $350 million in 1913. It was never ratified in all 50 states, meaning approved. 3 states reported it being held at gunpoint on Christmas Eve, I think, which is Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, and Kentucky, I think, but there's other states too. But once the 16th Amendment in America was falsely ratified, America was in big trouble. And we've been in big trouble ever since. So this is a big event. But they had this meeting. Fortunately, there were 3 representatives who were also millionaires there from America. John Jacob Astor, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus. They were at the meetings and they said, this is bullshit. We're not letting you do this to America. We've already been there before. This is why America was invented, because of these Ponzi schemes. And, when whoever controls the money controls everything. You've tried it, several times in the late 1700s, the War of 1812, only ended because we agreed to do a temporary version of the Federal Reserve. But they had been trying in the 1890s. They installed their attorney shill, Philander Knox, who Fort Knox is actually named after, not the Navy Admiral they give you that story about. And then Taft, the first Skull and Bones president, tried to get it passed during his term, couldn't get it passed, and so they went and suckered a history professor, Woodrow Wilson, who had a handler on him, and they got it falsely ratified using yellow journalism from the Hearst Corporation to tell everybody it was ratified, and then everyone just accepted it. Of course, they spun it really positive, like the press today. Woodrow Wilson was known as dying in his backyard of kind of dementia, saying, "I think I just sold my country out." And he was right. That's why presidents have to have business savvy, not just be people out of thin air for a particular race or gender. You have to have business acumen to run a business like a country, because we are all financially bound, and finances are the way that a country is rated as being strong in the 21st century. Didn't used to be that way. It used to be music and culture and art and invention and science and product creation and that kind of thing. But now it's all devolved down to money. So when people criticize presidents for running countries like companies, they're ridiculous. And that's why you have so much socialism and that kind of stuff. So this Southampton ship is about to set sail for America on its maiden voyage. And those three guys were on the ship. None of the other guys from Jekyll Island were on the ship. J.P. Morgan was supposed to be on the ship. Claimed he had the flu. Consequently, 50 of his employees were supposed to be on the ship, and 50 out of 50 also were sick. In fact, a ton of people who were supposed to be in first class called in sick. So the boat was estimated to be about half empty, including first class. J.P. Morgan, I've heard several stories about where he was. The night of, they said he was at the Moulin Rouge in Paris. A couple of days later, he was photographed with his mistress in Paris. Another little factoid was that J.P. Morgan was going to be shipping a bunch of very valuable bronze statues to America on the Titanic. Well, he had them all removed from the ship. They were on the ship, as reported, and he had them removed from the ship. Sounds like maybe he knew what was going to happen. In addition, there was very little publicity to sell tickets to get on this ship. Remember, when I was a kid, it was billed as the biggest ship in the world. Hence all the little cliches and claims of, it's of a Titanic proportion, Another thing that was peculiar. Well, because of all these cancellations in first class by some of the richest people in the world, including J.P. Morgan himself, they had a bunch of vacancies. Now, a bunch of really wealthy people wanted to be on that ship to be a part of history. Every time they would call in, or I guess go down to the place to talk about being on the ship, they were told that there were no first class cabins available. That if they were going to buy a ticket, they were going to be in second class. Some people have thought, well, that doesn't make sense for two reasons. First reason is it was half empty. Just J.P. Morgan and his 50 employees, that opens up 51 seats. And that's just if they didn't bring their spouses or mistresses, right? So maybe you double that to 100. It's a lot of vacancies. That's a lot of money lost, isn't it? I mean, I would assume that you wouldn't have to pay for the ticket if you didn't get on it. But now, what was the status of the White Star Company at the time? They are in financial peril. The Olympic is supposedly the other ship in the bay. It's got all kinds of busted up problems, going to have to replace the frame. It's hit a tugboat. It's hit the HMS Hawk. It's hit a shipwreck at the bottom of the ocean. or whatever in the bay. So it's got damages. They're operating on half of their income. Just think about these restaurants are going to have to open after this ridiculous fiasco we've had in 2020. There's a 5% to 10% profit in any normal restaurant. And now they're going to have to operate at 50% capacity. That's still death. Total death. Every time you start your business, you staff up like you're going to have a full restaurant, and then same number of chefs, but now you're making half the money. Now, the other sad part about this is that despite all of the shenanigans that are going on in first class, they didn't spare or give any excuse to the immigrants that were going to be down below. They could buy a ticket, no problem. Later, we will find that the immigrants were locked into their chambers down below. So when this thing got hit, they go to the door and they can't get out. Now, maybe someone could say that's bullshit, but I think the main reason why that is believable to me is that if you have a bunch of rich people in the deck and above, you don't want a bunch of immigrants, over 1,200 of them, rushing around the deck, taking up life rafts, right? They didn't have enough life rafts for everybody. And so you don't want them taking up seats for the rich people, leaving rich people on the boat. So before we get into the night of, more background, I told you that each ship cost $10 million. $10 million in 1910, 11, 12 was a tremendous amount of money. Now, this thing sank on April 15th, 1912. So the Olympic was in service for about 6 months ahead of time. Each ship was insured for $12 million. And after the Titanic sank, White Star profited $2 million. Got the whole, cost of the ship back plus $2 million. Sounds like a couple buildings I know. But now we need to introduce you to Captain Edward J. Smith. Captain Smith looked like the absolute stereotypical Navy captain. Big, white, beautifully, groomed beard. I mean, just like he just was born to have a beard. And he had the captain's hat on, always dressed in, full Navy gear, that sort of thing. But he was known as being a maverick when he operated ships. And he had two qualities, or I should say attributes about him. One, he liked to drive ships as fast as they possibly could go. He was known for that. And when everything worked out right, everybody was super excited about a little land or a sea speed record, right? But the other attribute about him was that due to his maverick nature of driving ships as fast as they could, he got in a lot of accidents. Now, I told you about 3 accidents that the Olympic had. He was the captain of the Olympic during all 3 accidents. Now, you might blow off 2 out of 3 because a tugboat's a hard thing to see on a gigantic boat like the Titanic. I might even cut him slack there. I'm not sure how easy it is to know where all the shipwrecks are, so I might cut him slack on that one too. But the HMS Hawk was a big piece of metal and definitely should have been seen. So let's take a quick examination here of the psychological state of Captain Smith. He's an old guy. He looked like he was at least in his late 50s. He had just basically destroyed a $10 million ship, wrecking it 3 times, costing the company a tremendous amount of money. And he had a record of hurting ships. So it's pretty easy to conclude / speculate he's probably pretty desperate here. He, could dig himself out of a ditch as long as he was willing to go along with this conspiracy. But he had one condition about sailing on the now, quote unquote, Titanic. he demanded to pick his crew specifically for this maiden voyage. Now, it's very interesting. When the crew got over to this quote-unquote fresh, brand new Titanic and went down and looked at the engine, they immediately came back and said, this engine's totally worn. It even needs some repairs. How is a brand new ship got a custom-made gigantic engine and it's already worn? Because it's probably the Olympic. So, JP Morgan owns White Star. He won't even go on his own ship in this maiden voyage across the Atlantic, which is really where they consider it the maiden voyage, a real voyage, not just driving the Olympic around, crashing it in the bay and all that kind of stuff. But this is where we have to introduce another ship. Just so happened to also be owned by JP Morgan. And it's called the California. And it's kind of a freighter ship that goes back and forth, nothing fancy. Now, at the time, there was a coal shortage in England, and California was noted as setting sail with a full hull of coal, meaning it had a lot of fuel, essentially, to keep going. Wherever it was going to go, it's supposed to be going to Boston. Captain Stanley Lord goes out into the ocean ahead of the quote-unquote Titanic. And he ends up going right to, very, very close to where the Titanic actually ended up sinking and parking on April 13th. And he not only parked his ship there, which parking makes no sense, he said to his crew two things. Keep the engines running at all times, ready to go whenever I want you to. And two, I want you to look off the bow of the ship for flares, especially this, red and blue flares, just in case something happens, right? Now, the other weird thing was the night of the accident. Again, the Titanic sunk at 2 a.m. on the 14th. So even though we say April 14th, we're only 2 hours into the day. He sent 3 messages south towards the Titanic, giving whatever could receive the message. And he labeled his messages, to the Titanic. 3 times he told them where he was. Now, going back to Captain Smith, who is now driving this Olympic with the Titanic plate on it, he plots a course through a known iceberg field. Now, you might think, well, it's still the official story. It doesn't make any blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, visibility was confirmed by every ship in the area, and there's 3 other ships in the area within 60 miles of that ship. Actually, one was about 90 miles away, and the California is about 19 miles north of the Titanic. Visibility was said to be 5 to 6 miles, and crystal clear. So no fog, no problems. Now, I did some looking up on sort of what visibility would be required to see icebergs and that sort of thing. Generally speaking, if visibility is at 2 miles at the time, it's deemed safe, completely safe, because you can turn a gigantic ship in 2 miles away from anything that's out there. Now, the night of, Captain Smith, who didn't usually do what I'm about to tell you, did something different. He lays down to go to bed, except he sleeps in his office, fully clothed. Not a typical procedure for a standard sea-to-sea flight. Flight or journey, I should say. He leaves an Officer Murdoch in charge. And of course, he's like, look out for icebergs, all this other kind of stuff. And Murdoch sees, this is how the story goes, the iceberg on the starboard side. And so he does a maneuver that to us might sound totally logical, but the sailors, they say that this is a suicide move and absolutely ignorant to a nth degree. He tells his crew to hit full steam ahead and to go port side, which is left, right? The way you can always remember port and starboard is that left, the word left has 3 letters in it, or 4 letters in it, excuse me. 3, sir. And port has 4 letters too. So starboard is more than 4. That's right. Port is left. What this maneuver does is it basically skids the side of the ship right into the iceberg. So it is actually a maneuver to hit an iceberg and make it drag down the starboard side, which is exactly what we think occurred. So here you have this impact with an iceberg. Now, what's really going on at this moment of the collision, most of you know this, is that the, and there's a conspiracy that I haven't heard surfaced in a while, that the steel that they used to build both ships was crap steel, and it was made very hastily, and it was very brittle. Now, that's maybe a conspiracy just to make this whole thing go down and give you an excuse. But what the iceberg did was it ripped a thin hole all the way down the starboard side of the hull, obviously allowing metric tons of water to start coming into the Titanic. Now, for most of us that don't build ships for a living, we're not quite sure, what happens when that happens, right? Well, inside the skeleton of the ship, most of you know that there's like rib cage inside the hull of a ship to keep it, having structural integrity. This thing I'm about to tell you doesn't happen in modern day ships, but it was a very unfortunate oversight and design back in the days, which is that there were essentially like firewalls inside the skeleton. So every rib had a wall. As I've read it several times and seen it in the official news things, is that most, ships today have these walls capped off at the top. Meaning, if you take on water inside one chamber, all you got to do is get people to go to the neighboring chambers, close the door, close the hatch, screw it tight, and that will fill up. But it won't sink to ship because it's only one cell in the hull that's full. But the Titanic was designed in a way that these didn't have like roofs over them. And so it spilled from one to the other, and that's why it took so long to sink. As it gets dragged down, it just takes on more and more, and it's an exponential curve until obviously you see the ship sink, right? So here's this ship. It's ripped down one side. The captain's notified. All eyewitnesses said, and the inquiry in Britain after this whole thing happened, which we're going to detail here, that the crew wasn't remotely alarmed, and especially not Captain Smith, as if everything went to plan. Now, one could construe that, wow, this is an amazing level of accuracy to create a collision. But again, the biggest ship in the world, hitting a pretty big iceberg, I don't know how hard that is, right? You just basically chase one until you run into it. Again, the truth of the matter of how this went down in terms of seeing an iceberg, trying to do a maneuver and hitting it may be absolutely untrue. And they just drove right at it and then just turned port, floored it, bam. Remember those 3 guys on the ship? You might think, all the other rich people got off the ship. Why didn't those 3 other guys get off the ship that were going to run over and tell on these dudes that were going to form this fraud called the Federal Reserve? Well, you're in the middle of the ocean. You just kill them. However you kill them. Strangle them to death, suffocate them, probably not fire a firearm, but you kill them. And they simply never show up to the deck to be rescued. Now, most of you know that these life rafts, these boats that you put over the side take a little while to prep. They're all clamped down. They're put in place so they don't fly off the ship. Now they hang them from the roofs, which is something that Sid Mead actually invented for one of the cruise liners. And they They thought he was crazy, and then they finally looked at how much space you get by doing it. Now they all do it. It's really funny. He just put that in design. Now it's the standard of the world. Back in the day, you would have your walkway around the outside of the ship, and then the distance between you and the edge on these parts where you have these rafts, that's where the boats were. So Murdoch and Smith, they don't begin preparing these boats until 45 minutes after the impact, which is kind of wild, you know. They don't deploy the first boat in the water until an hour and 25 minutes after impact. And if you've seen the movie, you'll see this portrayed all the time, right? Now, Captain Lord is up in the California, approximately 19 miles north of the Titanic. And the problem is that that's fairly long distance in the ocean with 5 to 6 miles of visibility. They can't even see the Titanic. Now, we obviously think that the California making a ridiculous stop in the middle of the ocean, which if any of you have dealt with freight, you know that you're paid based on when it arrives, and stopping in the middle of the ocean to have a nap is utterly absurd. So that's really absolutely circumstantial proof that they were trying to be there when the Titanic goes down to rescue all the millionaires. Problem. The Titanic navigator makes a huge mistake, and they're not where they're supposed to be. But the California is where it's supposed to be, and the Titanic's supposed to be 12 miles closer, cutting it down to 7 miles, making it real easy to just drive over there and rescue everyone. The California never made it to the Titanic, never helped a single person. A ship called the Carpathian ends up rescuing everybody. And the interesting thing about that is that at the time of the impact, they estimate that the Carpathian was about 58 miles away. And so it heard the distress calls, somehow managed to figure out where the hell everybody was, and picked up all the survivors. Now, the totals printed in the British newspaper were 866 people rescued, which is a tremendous amount. And it actually kind of blows me away. But over 1,250 immigrants died down below. To make it even weirder, the Carpathian takes all the survivors back to England. And then instead of being met by their family members and, the press and everyone, they end up getting hauled off into a warehouse. Again, premeditation. This is where we start getting into literally things that would have never happened had this been just a plain old accident. They're held in a warehouse for a day, 24 hours. This is not a place with any beds. It's not a place that's convenient for anyone. You got millionaires in there. I'm talking millionaires in the 1912, okay? April 15th, right? I mean, this is mega money. JP Morgan was said to have died, and he only had $2.5 million in his personal bank account because he was actually a proxy for the Rothschilds. So he never really had a ton of his own money. 2.5 million is a lot of money, but it's not mega money, which is why we think the White Star couldn't just fix the Olympic and get back out there and do its thing. JP wasn't as rich as he put on. He was rich enough to hang out in Paris, but not, just throwing millions and millions of dollars around. Not only are they held in a warehouse for 24 hours, but here's where you get into the almost confirmation that this was a pre-planned event. They were not allowed to leave until they all agreed to sign a document silencing them from discussing any of the events that they had just encountered, minus probably a cover story narrative that they were going to publish themselves, right? So initially, the British government was not going to have any inquiry into the event. It was simply going to be a shipwreck. Oh, too bad you all died, right? However, the people of Britain were like, we want to know what just happened. This is ridiculous. 1,250 people just died. And so they're like, okay, begrudgingly, the British government creates this inquiry. Some speculation is that the White Star Shipping Company had two leverage points against the British government. The low-hanging fruit was that 20,000 employees in Britain were employed by White Star, and so they didn't want to lose 20,000 jobs. Don't piss us off, so don't sue us out of existence, because then we'll fold our thing up and 20,000 people will be unemployed. But the other one, which is a little more strategic, is that the British government was allowed by JP Morgan to borrow any White Star ship if it was available for moving troops around and what have you. Dignitaries, they didn't want to lose that. So that's very strategic. World War pops out and, you need it. Remember, by 1937, this Titanic, which was now called the Olympic, was only taken out of commission because the British government commandeered it, most likely for World War II. But they appoint this super corrupt judge, Judge George Lord Macy, who just was notorious in his own way. Look him up. There was when you go into like a court, you have a plaintiff and a defendant. And usually, in most cases, it's two different people. It's two different companies, a person against the company, a company against the person, right? Not in this case. In this inquiry, which was pretty much likened to the 9/11 Commission report / inquiry. Nobody asked any hard questions is one thing that they noted. But the plaintiff and the defendant was the same group called the Board of Trade. So they were representing both sides of the game. And it was noted that one of the attorneys, this is hilarious, okay? Again, you never hear this kind of stuff. One of the attorneys representing the Board of Trade during his many dissertations, answering questions, referred to the Titanic several times as the Olympic. It's kind of like George Bush calling Al-Qaeda Al-Qaeda, which was the CIA's database of operatives in Afghanistan. Hilarious. George Bush was aware of what was going on behind the scenes, and so, of course, he used the real word he was always told, that that's the database of these people, and say, we said it wrong on TV. But get this. This is what's just unbelievable. For me personally, at least. So where does the blame fall after the inquiry's over? Okay, you would think the Captain Smith would be somewhat at fault. Nah, he was completely exonerated of any guilt. So who was found guilty? Remember the California that was supposed to rescue everyone that was out there just going in a circle? Well, they not even going in a circle, but out there, and the captain's taking a nap, making sure everybody looks for the distress call, make sure the Titanic got 3 messages to tell him where he was. Captain Lord of the California was blamed for the entire thing. That if he had been where he was supposed to be, I guess, that everybody would have been rescued. I mean, it was just a ludicrous assertion. They just pawned the whole thing off on that dude. Apparently, he went to his death, not executed or anything, but he was trying to get a new trial into this matter before he died so he could clean his name, but he never got the trial. So now, the shipwreck. There is a shipwreck on the bottom of the ocean. You've seen the little clips by James Cameron, his little boat down there. Didn't he build his own submarine to get that done? Well, there's a few interesting things about it. The shipwreck that we have seen on the bottom of the ocean was discovered to have gray paint as an undercoat on the hull. Well, here's a little factoid. Only the Olympic got the gray paint. The Titanic never got gray paint. So every time you see gray paint, you're looking at the Olympic, not the Titanic. Now, do you remember the story I told you about when the Olympic hit the shipwreck? it busted its propeller, and the propeller had to be moved from the Titanic over to Olympic while they built a new one for the Titanic. Remember the 401 stamp I told you about? In the shipwreck, on the bottom of the ocean, right now, the 401 propeller is on the shipwreck down there. Conclusive proof that that's the Olympic and not the Titanic. Now, another thing. I told you that the Olympic had 3 accidents. The tugboat accident and the HMS Hawk accident damaged the keel, and it had repairs on it. Well, the shipwreck at the bottom of the ocean has repairs on the keel. Okay. Well, the Titanic never was in an accident, supposedly, prior to this whole event, right? Conspiracy aside, it was the one that sank, right? But it should have no pre-existing damage on its hull. And the one on the bottom of the ocean has that repair. Thus the Olympic, not the Titanic. Now let's say you're still not convinced. I don't know how you couldn't be convinced, but let's say you're not convinced. At this point in the video, you are going to see photographic proof. It's the Olympic and not the Titanic. Now, you remember me telling you way back at the beginning of the story, there was only 3 things that made it labeled either the Titanic or the Olympic. The life rafts and the life vests were swapped. Okay, so those all check out, of course, if there's any left, I don't know. But the nameplate was swapped. If my theory / the theory, everyone's theory, is correct. Well, someone noted that plaques were not actually the standard methodology of putting the name of a ship on the ship. That it was actually etched into the steel. And I mean beautifully etched in the steel. If you've ever seen like, the name of a building etched in the marble outside, it's that beautiful just relief writing. That's what they used to do to the steel. And for any of you that know that guns have their serial numbers pounded into the steel just before they completely dry, that you molecularly galvanize the steel molecules such that even if you file off the serial number of a gun, you can put it in acid, melt the filing layers off, and the number will reveal itself again. Same thing for, I have to say, my bicycle got stolen in Boston when I was a kid. And it was just a bunch of bicycles were getting stolen. And my dad and I were driving to an event. He was in his full-blown military officer garb, all his medals and shit. And he's driving by, and I'm not paying attention. He's like, "Is that kid on your bike?" And I was like, "Oh, no, probably not. No way." And I was didn't want to stop the car. He goes, "I think it was." He flips it around the car, and it's some kid who's probably, 14, 15 years old riding my bike. It was a Black Phantom Schwinn bike. My dad just walked over with the kid sitting on the bike. He just grabs the frame, pulls it up, knocks the kid off the bike, and looks underneath. And sure enough, the kids try to file off the serial number. And he just threatened the kids and put it in the back of the car and drove back home and dropped the bike off. It was painted all black. It was already black anyway, but they got rid of some fenders off the chain. Bastards. Got my bike back down. Okay, what's that have to do with the story? Well, God works in mysterious ways sometimes, right? If it wasn't bad enough, there's gray paint. There's a 401 stamped on the propeller, and the keel has been repaired. Something never to have been recorded in Titanic's history. The nameplate that says Titanic on it has corroded away and revealed some letters underneath. Now, the divers didn't have permission to touch the boat and change it, right? So all they can do is take a picture of what's revealed underneath this corrosion area of the plate. They don't have permission to take the plate off, clean it off, and see the full word Olympic underneath the nameplate. But as luck would have it, you can see clear as day 2 letters underneath the plate, an M and a P. And I don't know about your spelling. I'm not exactly the best speller in the whole world, but I don't think M or P is in the word Titanic. And so we now have, I'll put this on the video, proof that this thing is indeed the Olympic. Now, I told you I would tell you another story I've seen where a gentleman followed this for 30 years. And what's interesting about these millionaires is that once they hatch a story, they love to keep it. They don't want anything to unravel. And I'm going to go off on some tangents because I got more time on my stick, and we will be done with this story here shortly. So I'm going to at least demarcate where my potential rambling might start for some of you that get all butthurt about me talking off topic, but very few of you. Just some people in the comments, oh my God, you're rambling like crazy. I'm like, oh, dude, it's 500 shows. Try to do that without rambling. Anyway, this guy presents all of his facts. And of course, it's, I think it was like a BBC sort of thing. And most of you know the term called a hit piece, right? A hit piece is where they have already pre-decided how to slant everything. That show, Mythbusters, is nothing more than a shilly show to clear the way for all of the dark events of the world elite, right? Penn and Teller, two shills that will take money. They're from New York, and they literally, both the Mythbusters and Penn and Teller, never present you architects and engineers for 9/11 truth data, 3,000 PhDs, 7,000 graduate and undergraduate degrees in specific areas of architecture, metallurgy, and structural engineering. You know, they're telling you things are impossible. So this hit piece goes out on this guy, and they bait this dude forever in this thing. Well, maybe you're right. Well, tell us all of your facts about why you think this is the case. And what was interesting is they must have edited out a tremendous amount of what I just told you. And he, at the time this was recorded, I don't know when this was recorded, the one I saw, I'm going to tell you about, Aaron. They get him all the way to the end of this documentary, which physically was beautiful. I mean, the way they filmed it and everything. And they take him down to some archive. Must be in Southampton. I don't know. But some of you may have seen this. They take him down to this archive, and they're like, we are going to pull out the original schematics for the Titanic and the Olympic. And let's take a look at the physical evidence of what we found on the bottom of the ocean and prove whether or not it's the Titanic or the Olympic. And they're showing him, you know, photographs of the shipwreck. He's seen all that stuff. He has seen all that. And this is where this I don't even know what the hell you call it. You guys are probably sailors. You know exactly what this is. But the front part of the ship where the captain's quarters are, or, you know, his command center there. And again, I can't remember which way it was, but one was bowed and one was flat. Whatever one is on the bottom of the ocean, here's what was hilarious. They portrayed this guy as losing all faith in his conspiracy theory on the spot. They open up these blueprints. I hope you guys are yelling at the camera right now with how absurd this is. But they open it up. Okay, there's the Titanic. Okay. And what I haven't seen with the bottom of the ocean thing are the windows widths. Seems like that'd be pretty easy to verify one way or the other. But again, the propeller, let me break it, was never moved back to the other ship. Why do that? It's just going to cost you a bunch of money for no reason. Why was the engine in the Titanic worn at least 6 months before it ever set sail? Impossible. Yeah, you might run it in the dock, but you're not going to run it to the level of, you know, having, you know, massive wear and tear that engineers are going to go in there and go, what the hell is this, you know? But sure enough, the Titanic labeled blueprint, okay, had that shape accurate to the one that's on the bottom of the ocean. You know, these documents are old, supposedly from 1911-ish, right? Probably between 8 and 11, right? 1908 and 11, because you design it before you build it, sort of thing, right? But the thing is that the idea that they would hatch a conspiracy of this level to defraud the insurance company first and foremost, it's worth $2 million in profit, let alone the $10 million you're going to be out with this ship's principal cost, right? And remember, they lost the case to the HMS Hawk. Who knows what the damages to that boat is, right? And the whole front was caved in, man. It was really bad. It looks like it could definitely be repaired, trust me, but it's probably 10% of the front of the ship when it's gone. Okay, you don't think that they would have printed falsified blueprints and then stick them in an archive? They would do the falsified blueprints just to win the case against their insurance company alone. And again, I can't see the shape of this because when they took photographs, the one photograph you see of the Olympic and the Titanic in the docking bay at the same exact time, I believe the Titanic is facing away from us on the left and the Olympic is facing towards the camera on the right. It's so exposed that you don't get contour on the front of the ship. So it's like a bar of white. You don't get any like shading or anything, right? Maybe Photoshop could help if you had the original photograph. Unfortunately, they didn't have like an Ansel Adams camera that sat there for, a minute of an exposure or something to really get the HDR, 32-bit color. But yeah, he sees this and they portray it. Now remember, they can cut anything the way they want to cut it. And I'll tell you how they cut these documentaries in case you see something like this, or God forbid you're ever involved in one. One, the people that are usually suckered into a hit piece have initially, when it first happens to them, they have no clue this is happening to them. They think there's going to be a genuine exposure moment for them. They're lured in by the producers. I mean, I can tell you this. Again, I've met producers of shows like Jesse Ventura's show. I met one of his producers once who then called him a complete fraud. But they'll call you up on the phone and they'll say things like this. You're the guy that's been studying the Olympic Titanic swap. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, well, we're going to pay for a whole 45-minute, AKA 1 hour special. It's going to be on Discovery Channel, History Channel, whatever. And we really want you to make your case because we'd love to expose this once and for all. The dude's like, yay, he's going to get his story to be the finale of the show. Finally exposed, 30 years, vindication. He's no longer crazy to all his neighbors. By the way, there is a tremendous amount of minute details about the cast, or I shouldn't say the cast, the crew that got on the ship and finding little anomalies and things in that particular special. So you ever see it does have value. And you can just laugh at the finale. But I remember them showing his face, looking at these blueprints, and just having this. I mean, this is the way I remember it. It's been several years since I've seen this. And I think I saw it through YouTube. I think. But he was just devastated, I don't think he cried or anything, but he was just devastated. And of course, they're telling him, see, so, you're totally wrong. And of course, it's like, this is where I wish I was involved in those situations because I would have just looked at the guy. But again, imagine it was me, right? I would have just told them to their face that this is obviously a forgery, that this is a conspiracy. They're trying to defraud an insurance company. You don't think they're going to print false blueprints? This is nothing. Yes, they are 100 years old because they printed this 100 years ago to defraud an insurance company. Now, the interesting thing is that the ship not being discovered for a really long time was very fascinating because I think that they wanted enough distance between them and the wreck and their deaths, right? Because it is related to Jekyll Island. I think this was going to happen anyway, but remember the people who say, never let a crisis go to waste. And so when they decide that a ship is going down, you just grab these three dudes, give them first class tickets, and poof, they're off to the races, right? But even if that guy looked down at the blueprints and said, this is a fraud, said everything I just said, guess what? They just cut it and it never airs. So it looks like he goes home, a loser to his theory. So a lot of celebrities nowadays, Michael Jackson did this when he got interviewed by that Indian guy who was just pushing and pushing and pushing. If you have any doubts about that, go see my Neverland series. There's two shows to it. One right after I watched the HBO special where I hadn't done my research. And then the very next episode was after doing research and figuring out that fraud. But you demand to have, in your contract with whoever's going to do a documentary on you, you demand to have your own camera in the room and the rights to publish your footage X amount of weeks or days or hours after they publish theirs. And so that way you can say, they cut the interview, I said this, they said that, you lied. The other one that celebrities do, and this is actually for a lot of you who might, have some stardom in a small way, if you're ever interviewed, there's, several different ways they do interviews. There's email interviews, which is very ironclad because you have your responses to their questions and you could just publish your email, publish the email that you sent to clear up the misrepresentation. The second one is a radio interview. And if you don't record what you say and what they say, then they can construe and claim you said things you didn't say. Misunderstandings do occur organically, but one of the reasons why Stanley Kubrick stopped talking to the press right after starting to talk to the press was that he said, it doesn't matter what I say, they print whatever they want. And so I'm just never going to do an interview with them so they can never say that I said something I didn't say. And Prince was the same way, Prince was also known for, because usually when like Rolling Stone magazine shows up to do an interview with you, they bring a cameraman with them. And Prince had stipulations that said you have to bring a Polaroid back to the camera so you can take a shot, but I have to have a Polaroid immediate preview, and then I get to tell you what pictures you can take with you. Very fascinating. So rolls of film will be put aside. But the other one is obviously a videotaped interview, and that's where you have your own camera rolling no matter what. And quite frankly, just do it anyway. The one I do often is I'll just turn the recorder on my phone and just put it out there if I'm having some meeting with someone. I just let them know, you don't mind if I do this. It's come in handy, So why would they want to separate themselves from this event? Well, it reveals a massive conspiracy, which today no one cares about anymore, right? And again, I was on Facebook probably about 4 months ago and someone talked about the Titanic and I talked about the swap. And it was some, people from my hometown. I don't know who the guy was. He's probably not from my hometown, but close by. And this woman was like, oh my gosh, really? Did that happen? And this guy comes in his butthurt official story. Obviously doesn't work for JP Morgan. He just was, don't listen to him. This is a complete conspiracy. And it misrepresents history. Like, what the fuck, dude? What are you mad? What do you care about the Olympic and the Titanic being swapped? I showed a friend of mine who's from England and now lives in America. And I showed them the rebuilding of Stonehenge in 1954 from its original site. And it really was there. It just was not where you find it today. And it was all collapsed. There was only like one stone that had the little T-bar across the top, right? Or was it the in-bar? Whatever it is, right? The altar thing. And they picked all the stones up and they took them someplace and they repaired them with cement so that they had the bases again. And then they picked a ritual circle that had no stones, but it was a place that had a reliefed circle. So it seemed like a place where Stonehenge could have been built. And they reassembled it. They took 110 photographs in black and white. The public was there. You watched little kids, watching them rebuild Stonehenge. But today they tell you that's exactly where Stonehenge was built. And it's a complete and utter lie. And the funny thing is that my friend looks at this and, could barely, process it. And the funny thing is that they're kind of a, red-pilled person, if not a tremendously red-pilled person. And then they just couldn't let the whole thing just be true. They said, well, they probably built it where it was. And I said, well, did you watch all the photographs? No, it was going too slow. The video was going too slow. So cognitive dissonance, Kubler-Ross, denial, never got past that stage. We stayed in negotiation on the phone, never acceptance. I said, no, you watch the whole thing. I mean, it's the circles at the very beginning. So how could you miss that photograph, right? Maybe you didn't know what you're looking at. I get it. I had to watch it 2 or 3 times myself. Still, couldn't just accept what was there. And so those people get earmarked as not really where you want to get your information from. For me, I think it's the Jekyll Island angle that is the reason why they don't want you to know this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of theories out there that have a little thread in the sweater. And they don't want you to find the thread that you could pull and the whole sweater goes dead. Now I'm going to take you down a similar archetype of a truth that is being hidden so that you don't find out where oil comes from, because it unravels things. It's very similar to why on earth would they deny us some very upfront science that was taught in schools up till about 1962, at least. Last person I know that said they went to college and they were actually taught this as a complete theory of how the world functions. But it's being suppressed because it reveals that oil is not a fossil fuel. That oil is an organic thing that the world creates very naturally. Many of you have listened to the show several times. You've heard this before. This is sort of like when someone goes into the spin of like, why would they lie about that? Usually because they killed 3 guys that were going to come to America and spill the beans about Jekyll Island. We only find out about Jekyll Island now because what do they care? They've got complete control. They'll tell you to your face, yeah, we killed Kennedy. No problem. What are you going to do about it? He's dead. He's been dead for over 60 years or 57 years. What are you going to do about it? Oh, nothing? That's what I thought. So up until 1962 in America, in various colleges, probably not all colleges, they taught you that the world expands. You can see it with your own eyes. It is the most evident thing that if you can't see expansion, you got to check yourself. I know a bunch of people I love out there don't believe in it, but you just have to check yourself. If you take the planet Earth and you shrink away all the oceans, all of the continents, unlike Pangea drift theory, where they put them all together in a big island, in a big continent and somewhere floating in the ocean, they told you that this continent just breaks away, just somehow, right? No explanation for the force that's going to make that happen. And all these pieces floated around, which is why you know for a fact that South America butts up against Africa perfectly. But to their luck, the human mind doesn't really have hand-eye coordination, 3D object, spatial analysis really well developed because we don't have any art in school anymore. So the brain just stays retarded on the right side. But if you take Australia and the Asian Pacific Rim, you can move those right over and they kiss against North America and South America. By the time you get rid of all the oceans without using subduction, which is pushing one continent underneath another, very disciplined mathematical approaches to this whole thing, the world completely connects on all sides. There are 2 seams in the world that are worth noting. One down the Pacific and one down the Atlantic. If you look at any relief map of the ocean bottoms, they forgot to erase that so you can see it. They don't teach us anymore. They teach you Pangea drift. Because if you learn that there's a force at the center of the earth pushing it out, it completely changes cosmology. Completely. This little change to everything will erase fossil fuel. How did it get classified as fossil fuel? If I got the numbers right, it was 1894. And the Rockefellers, who had the oil market from Standard Oil completely cornered, they could never really raise the rate of oil because oil burps out of the crust of the earth naturally. And again, people don't know this, but if you ask Texas historians, they will know this, that a lot of areas in South Texas had just seas of oil. Probably not that deep, but probably not that shallow either, because it just seeps out. Because it's naturally created just at the crust level of the outer coating of Earth. Okay? Just bump the mic. Try not to touch the mic this time. Now, Tesla in Springfield, Colorado, proved that the world's core is made of plasma energy. He proved it. That's how he got the standing lightning bolt for 1 minute in his laboratory there. And once he proved that, he packed everything up and went back to New York because he figured it out. And this is when he started working on his Tesla Tower in 1917. JP Morgan also fucked that one up too. Center of the sun is plasma. Center of the moon is plasma. Every body in space that has a hard surface most definitely has a plasma core. Now, gas giants most likely have a combination of a bunch of different things. Definitely a plasma core, though. The reason why your compass points north isn't because of the ridiculous theory that we have nickel iron at the core of the Earth. I have read that nickel iron at 6,500 degrees Fahrenheit loses all magnetism. Well, what do they tell you about the center of the Earth and its heat? Way above 6,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's not going to be any compass pointing north with a nickel iron core. That's some cover theory that they use. But if it's made of electricity, okay, which is plasma energy, what plasma looks like? Look up a lightning bolt. That's what plasma energy is. It is the stem cell of nuclear matter. Okay, it's moving so fast. It's ethereal matter moving so quickly. It hasn't slowed down to become anything. Well, why would the world expand? Why would that ever happen? Well, because the sun is constantly ejecting its subatomic ethereal particles, which is going to metabolize into plasma, moving 50 times the speed of light. And through sheer gravity wells that are created by negative pockets of ether, it goes into the top of Earth, becomes our bowels, and goes out the bottom. And everything is trading these spirals of this energy, of this subatomic matter that goes into our planets and expands us. The world expands 19 centimeters a year. And just think about that. A 7,900 mile across ball, 24,000 miles around, is expanding 19 centimeters. That's a lot of expansion. What would happen if you had a crust on the outside? Because it cools with the zero temperature of space, right? And that's where you get a crust. Okay. Well, you're going to start tearing the outer surface of this crust. And we just happen to have two weak points. The weakest point is the seam down the Pacific Ocean, which is why it's bigger. It ripped faster, which is why it's got a bigger gap. The Atlantic is slightly stronger. It expanded slower, which is why the Atlantic Ocean is smaller and easier to cross. Thank God. Okay. What are the two most abundant atoms in the universe? Carbon and hydrogen. You ever heard that human beings are carbon-based life forms? Yeah, it's because it's really common. Well, what is oil? Right? What is oil? Well, it's a combination of carbon and hydrogen. Now, some of you may have heard of methane gas. It's very, very flammable. That's why Mexico City's blew up that one day, because their sewage system wasn't draining out all the sewage, and there's a natural returning back to its carbon-based form, and you get methane gas. And then they had a spark, and boom, the whole street blew up. It's a pretty amazing video of that if you want to go look it up. Okay, so methane gas is 1 carbon, 4 hydrogen. Well, is carbon flammable? No. Carbon is what you see when you burn a log. When you burn it all the way down, you see its carbon base, right? Well, what happens when you light hydrogen on fire? Remember was it the Hindenburg? Wasn't that a hydrogen vehicle? It blows up. It's a natural explosive, which is why the sun has got a lot of hydrogen on its outside. Well, methane gas is really easy to make. 1 carbon as the binder and 4 hydrogen on the outside. Now, that's naturally being created at the precipice of the plasma ball on the inside of Earth and the first slowed down particles that turn into atoms, right? A lot of carbon down there and a lot of hydrogen down there. Well, they eventually get crushed inside the crust of the Earth. What's crude oil? Well, go look it up. Just go look it up on Wikipedia. You're going to have an inverse equation. Lots of carbon, less hydrogen. Remember, methane was the opposite ratio. Lots of hydrogen, 1 carbon. When you crush it, you're going to be crushing more of the non-flammable stuff, because if it was flammable, it would have burned away. So this non-flammable carbon gets in there and reverses the polarity of the molecule. How do we refine gas? Well, okay. Do you put crude oil in your car or do you put gasoline in your car? Is your gasoline the same as diesel gasoline versus unleaded versus all these high octane super fuels, jet fuel and kerosene, the same thing? You got some race car gas. It's like, it was 105 octane. Have you seen a refinery? They essentially boil in gigantic pipes crude oil. And what that process does is that gets the carbon atoms, the carbon atoms to move out of the crude oil. It separates the carbon from the hydrogen. As I've had it explained to me, the heavier gas versions like diesel are at the bottom, towards the bottom of the pipe. And the high octane fuel's way up towards the top of the pipe because it weighs less, because of less carbon in it. Remember, leaded, unleaded, all that whole thing. So all we're doing is returning crude oil back to its original state, which is methane gas. Now, some people might say, oh man, I've seen experiments where they take plants and they let them rot and it turns straight into carbon. And kind of an oily, sticky substance. And I see it's proof that all the ferns from the dinosaur days and the dinosaurs themselves all turn into the oil that we keep drilling out of the ground, no matter what. Well, in 1894, the Rockefellers took a sample of crude oil to, I believe, like some convention, like a Geneva type convention where they were looking at this sort of thing, and they had it classified as a fossil fuel. And how did they pull that off? Am I crazy? No. If you go look up, this is the great experiment you could do first. Go look up all of the chemicals that are found in the spectrum of a coronal mass ejection off the surface of the sun. You'll find tons of hydrogen, some helium in there. But eventually, if you look way down on the index, a single % is divided into a bunch of different things. And oxygen is one of the things that they find in the spectrum. Why is that? Well, the sun's a big, giant ball in space, very heavy. When you have lots of gravity, you can create fusion right on the surface of the sun. If you read a little deeper, you will find that they say that the center of the sun is cooler than the crust. And if that was big hydrogen ball, then the center would be really hot and the outside would be a little bit cooler, even if it's millions and millions of degrees. But because the center is most likely hollow, that's why that happens. It gets cooler as you go towards the inside. A sunspot is looking into the bowels of a blank, empty ball. So the same infinitesimal amount of oxygen that is found on the surface of the sun is the same percentage found in crude oil. What they did was they leveraged this little bit of oxygen, less than 1% inside crude oil, to get it classified as a fossil fuel. Why would they do that? Why would Standard Oil Company want that to ever occur? It's ingenious. It's absolutely monetarily ingenious. Now, it's always said that by 1830, the Rockefeller Standard Oil Company had found this process of refining crude oil into things that were usable. But then they had to develop markets to use it, right? Combustion vehicles, anything. Well, you fast forward 64 years, and they hadn't really been able to raise the rate of oil because there was so much of it on the surface of the earth. And when they punch a hole in the ground, just like that, you see Beverly Hillbillies, you might think it's crazy that Jeb shot at a rabbit in the credits and oil came poking out, just bubbling out, right? And that's how it was a Texas crew. Texas tea is what they said in the song, right? And he moves to Beverly Hills and he's really, really rich. What he did was actually technically possible, that you'd penetrate the crust of the earth and poof, you get a little bubble of like a water fountain of oil, crude oil. Yeah, it was that plentiful back in the day. After it became a fossil fuel, Standard Oil, for the first time, was able to significantly raise the rate of oil. What's that do? Makes them extremely rich, right? How many of you have heard peak oil theories? We're going to run out of oil. One of the most asinine things I've ever heard in my life. And unfortunately, the amazing red pillar Michael Rupert fell for that one hardcore. We're never going to run out. Now, we can drill it so fast that the Earth's natural process of creating it slows way, way down. I mean, it's got a standard rate at which it creates this stuff. But my family's been in oil in all kinds of different ways. I got a family that we own land that has oil. We lease. My father worked in oil as a perforator of wells. Another family member of mine has leased oil wells for 35 years, and then he retired. Just oil, oil, oil. There's one thing that most people getting oil don't know until they get into it, and they're like, oh my God, it's a miracle. It's an ATM machine. You drill one well empty, just like literally sucking on a straw, and there's nothing there. You get that sound, right? And then you go over and drill another part of your land, and you drill that one empty. Then you come over and survey your previous empty hole when it's full again. The Arabs found this out a long time ago. They have the sweetest crude in the world, right? Their shit just pops out of the planet. Now, I watched an amazing documentary by a guy who was what do you call him? He's like a father. He's a preacher that worked for the Alaskan Oil Company. I can't remember who actually owns that up there. It's like Exxon or somebody. I can't find this documentary anymore, but right after the documentary, I had no problem doing what he said, and now I can't find it anywhere on the planet. He said he had made friends with the head of the oil company up there, the guy that was a part of that region, in charge of that region. And he said that, he got into like their circles where they smoke cigars and play poker, and drank booze and stuff because nothing else to do up there. And he said they just kept him closer and closer and closer until they finally told him the story of figuring out that there was a formula that they had figured out in 1979. They figured out the entire mathematical formula of the ecosystem of this methane to crude oil to gasoline, and then it was infinite. You'll find a video out there with one of the head geologists of America talks about being in a conference. I think he said for like 3 years off and on. And he said he went to the head geologist of the world and said, is it a fossil fuel at dinner? And the guy laughed in his face. And he said that the idea that ferns and dinosaurs and all this other crap makes crude oil, and that we have this finite amount of it, is BS, because at 16,000 feet, all life stops. That's just 3 miles. Just 3 miles down. And we don't have any more life. But we can find oil as far down as we can drill. But the Russians went over 8 miles once, right? So if nothing's ever been alive down there and you're finding crude oil down there, well, I guarantee you it's not ferns that drain down into the center of the earth. Have you ever seen a volcano? How it works? It goes up, not down. As much as gravity might try to pull. So things are kept secret because they link to other things. I don't know exactly why the Titanic was concealed in the modern days, right? They could reveal the whole conspiracy today, but they don't want you to step on this other associated thing with the three gentlemen who were going to tattletale on the Federal Reserve plan. We know that there is a ton of theories that will undermine the confidence of the citizens and their government. Pearl Harbor was orchestrated. Just go look it up. The Korean War, well, who knows? Franz Ferdinand being killed to start World War I. He was definitely murdered, but making that the catalyst to start a world war is a bit of a stretch. The Gulf of Tonkin that starts Vietnam War, totally in the books as never having occurred, but the catalyzing event that LBJ used to reward the bankers for his participation in the death of JFK. Go see my episode, Killing Our Heroes. The moon missions. Well, NASA's still in business, right? GPL's still in business, making tons of money. It's a nice little apparatus to move a lot of money into shadow projects that no citizen would ever approve. And so it's a cash cow. They're selling you pictures. That's all they're doing. Rocket goes out of your view, and the rest is all CG. Now, a little preview to probably the next episode I'm going to do here. more stuff that is being concealed because it will reveal all. August of last year, 2019, an employee of Google defected out of the company and went straight to Project Veritas with, I think when I downloaded it was about 350 megabytes of text files, which if anybody knows how small text files are in general, a screenplay can compress down to like 220K. That's 120 pages. This is a lot of data. I perused it. I found one text file that was all of the words that are gagged from Google. Meaning if you try to search on them, they act like they don't know what you're talking about. Well, conclusive proof that a bunch of things are exactly what you think they are if you've taken the red pill. The file is full of hundreds and hundreds of key phrases. And what I found was amazing. And I don't know, again, I haven't seen every video on YouTube, but no one seems to have covered this guy. And it was strange. When he defected, they found out that he had these files. And this is like sick shit, man. They called the San Francisco Police Department and told them where he lived. And then this corporation, not a psychiatric ward, not some hospital, not some psychologist, not his family. They told the police officers that he was mentally unstable and probably armed to the teeth, and that he was a danger to society and he needed to be apprehended ASAP. That's the official story. Probably some cash in the background was going on. I mean, San Francisco being corrupted, who could possibly conceive of that? Oh, right, they have one of the most corrupt senators on planet Earth, right? Okay. But they go to this guy's house during the day, like in the morning, as he tells the story on Project Veritas. And they surrounded, he lives in like the upper part of a strip of apartments, right? There's the businesses down below and all the apartments above. Anyone's been to San Francisco knows that's how that works, right? They surround the whole block, cut off all the traffic. They start bullhorning him and saying, you're so-and-so, you need to come out with your hands up. And he won't come out because he's like, holy crap, they're going to shoot me now and say that I did something. And so he gets one of his best friends to help him out filming. He calls him, so he comes outside and starts filming the door. And I guess he's far enough away. The cops, I've seen the video. And he has to come out with his hands up, walking slow. I mean, he's in fear of being shot. Dead men tell no tales, right? The Google Corporation should be sued beyond your wildest dreams what this kid had to go through, because it was like, and the San Francisco Police Department need to be at least investigated, right? Like, how could you possibly take a phone call from an employer and just buy it lock, stock, and barrel? Not like, well, you're going to need more evidence than just you're pissed off at a disgruntled employee. Maybe just say he stole something, intellectual property, and then the federal marshals have the right to go in and get it back. That's probably more legit than saying he's a nutbag, right? But this text file, I'm going to say just a general estimation, it was probably 80% full of two types of phrases. And here's your preview of what's coming up. Every single false flag massacre in this country for the last 15 years is in this text file. Whatever you want to look up, the location. I'm not going to name them. I'll read them to you in the next episode. But in addition to all of the names and all the places, right? All the names and places like the city and the state and maybe the institution that was involved in some shooting. Now, again, I'm never going to say to you that people don't get killed in some of these things. We know some events, I think, have no evidence to prove anyone got killed, and a lot of them, plenty of evidence, okay? But the phrase crisis actor was blocked in several different ways. Every way you could possibly construe these two words together was in this file. In addition, any crisis actor by name that was identified with an IMDb acting portfolio, a kid named Hodges is in there, must be 20 entries for Hodges. 20 entries for anyone of name that has ever been pinned down. You're not allowed to search on their names. Don't you think that is incredibly, incredibly revealing? And he gets on Veritas and gets interviewed. He seemed a little phony to me, to be honest with you, but like almost like they put this guy out there to make us look at something else. Maybe they gave us files that are misleading us, but this one file is so damning, it's unbelievable. 80% of this file is blocking red pill subjects by name, by specific name. Every way you could misspell someone's name is in there. Not every single way, but pretty damn covered to block it from ever showing up. Now, the one stipulation they said, which I think is absurd, is that it was only for mobile phones. That was at least the file that we got was targeted at mobile customers. But come on. One, I don't know why this is ever in a file, right? Why isn't it in a database with an interface? Like, they're not, maybe they'd use flat file lookups to make it faster. I have no idea. But you're going to read it into memory for a query. You're not going to read it from a file. You're not going to read it from the database until it's marked as refreshed. So the interesting thing, the reason why I'm going through these other things, one, I had more time on my stick, but two, we're always looking for archetypes of deceit because this is how you poke their eye out. When you play a video game, take the old Zelda games, right? If you ever battled a Zelda boss, it's sort of a visual way of looking at an archetype in a story. What do? You walk in the room, there's the boss. You've never cheated. You never looked through a walkthrough. No one's ever played the game before. You just got it from the store. None of your friends have beaten the bosses yet. What do? You got a certain number of weapons you can use, right? And so you shoot a bunch of arrows at the dude and it doesn't seem to work. He's going through different phases and different stages. At one point, his eyeball gets really big and whatever. And you figure out, I have to wait for him to show his eyeball to me. Then I shoot him with the arrow. Then I got to move out of the way. I don't fire him at all because he's invincible in this phase. And then, he's vulnerable. Pow, 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 pow. Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, different weapons. Throw a bomb, drop a bomb, shoot him with an arrow, hit him with your sword. Eventually the dude dies. The dude dies eventually, right? This is how we have to do our non-work. We're so informed these days. Again, because we have been the victims of all of their crimes. They only see it from one side. They try to estimate what it's like to be the victim of what they do. But they can't quite be the victim because they never allow themselves to be the victim. And so here we are getting a PhD in being victims of their system. We get so good at it that we can see it coming before it happens. Just ask Bill Cooper if he saw it coming, right? The dude's murdered before the end of 2001 because he predicted 9/11 before it happened. He saw the CNN interview with Osama bin Laden. He goes, okay, guys, brace yourself. It's coming. They're pushing him. They're telling you that the government's been looking for him as the most wanted target since 1997, and all of our intel couldn't find this guy in the world. But CNN gets a sit-down interview with the guy. Oh, really? Okay. So Bill Cooper called it right. Boom. We get this thing that happens blamed on this phantom guy who's got a totally normal name, by the way. I think, too, that there's just, there's a fair number of people still in existence that take the blue pill every morning and they go through their, cognitive dissonance all day long and they go back to bed and they wake up, they take the pill again to make sure that nothing ever messes up their fragile lives. They're used to having everything given to them by somebody, either their parents or the state. And so they don't know how to get tough. And so they can't ingest anything. As the helicopter flies over. Every little interesting story helps us ingest a bigger story. So you might, when people learn that the world is not really what they think it is, that all the history is wrong, and it's wrong only for one reason, mainly, we do get things wrong organically, but it's wrong because it's protecting something in a lot of cases. The Titanic is just one little story. Stonehenge is just one little story. All the assassinations are one story. The moon is a big story. It goes on and on and on. What I like about these little stories is that you can tell anybody these stories. And you'll be fascinated. You'll show someone the MP picture from the Olympic on the bottom of the ocean, and they still will act like they're completely blind to anything. Probably something else. Probably something else. Isn't it funny that was it Star Trek: The Motion Picture from '79 had a similar thing where Voyager was covered in scum from space, and it thought its name was V'ger. It's pretty funny, right? Anyway, hope you dug the episode. But want to do this for a very, very long time. And so we're going to try to make the last few episodes of this season pretty killer. So hopefully you dug that. And hopefully you didn't mind the digression afterwards. But anyway, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. It's where everything exists. There's 2 video, 2 audio, 4 social media. Please get on our locked Facebook group if you do have social media of any kind. You will find a bunch of like-minded, great people that help you deal with the stress of life. Let me just tell you. We have 2 ways to donate to the show. And I have to say, you guys have been very kind in this very tumultuous time. We've had at least $50 added to the Patreon, and between the last episode and this episode, someone gave me a good chunk of change from PayPal. So thank you so much. You're all in the credits. You'll be in the credits from this point forward. So be instantly in season 6 credits as well. There's a store if you want to get some tchotchkes that will go dead in about 10 days. About 10 days from today's the 21st. And there's an all-new remastered Season 1. So you will not find the first 100 episodes on this channel. It's off on a different channel. I had to do that so I wouldn't interrupt all the numbering systems on this channel. It took me a long time to go through 100 episodes, but they're all audio balanced. It's a rougher show at the beginning, but the content is mainly for you personally to improve your life from all kinds of different things. There's all kinds of cool stuff in Season 1. But I had the microphone right up next to my mouth, so I didn't know what I was doing. I apologize. But anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.